Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Business of Boutique Fitness. I'm Alina, the director of Start Your Studio Profitably, and today I'm joined by the wonderful Matt.
I'm so excited to talk to you today, Alina, because this is something that you and I see all the time, right? And these are just some fundamental mistakes. And like you said, specifically for when you're opening a new studio, but also super relevant for those studios that are already open.
Absolutely. And Matt and I both work within the Start Your Studio Profitably team here at Studio Grow. And we have opened hundreds of boutique studios, and the majority profitably this past year. And we're really beginning to see some key trends as to why some open profitably and why some don't. So we wanted to share some of those with you today and hopefully allow you to avoid some of the pitfalls that we see.
Yeah, absolutely. I think today will just be a great little playbook on the what to do's and what not to do's when it comes to this sort of thing. So let's dive into it.
Absolutely. So, in no particular order, the first thing I want to talk about today is branding.
Mhm.
So, this is a big one. It's the first impression anybody has of your business. It's how they feel when they see your logo, they see your branding in life, how it communicates your values, your mission, your vision. But in a lot of cases, it's being completely mishandled by so many founders.
Like AI generated images. I'm going to trigger both of us when I talk about all of this stuff. But I mean, it's one of those things that when we're starting to work with a new client in this process, branding is one of the very first conversations that we have. And we're always looking for opportunities to do things as cost efficiently as we can throughout this process. But branding is one of the areas that I never encourage people to skimp on. Right, let's factor whatever we need to pay into this in order to get ourselves good branding, and we'll just make the numbers work, because when you skimp on it, it's just a bad first impression to make.
Absolutely. And you're 100% right there. It is the first impression your business makes. It's how people feel when they experience your space, your instructors, your content ultimately. And I completely agree with you, Matt. It's something we see far too many studio owners come to us and we ask them, so where are you at when it comes to your branding? And they show us. And straight away, we can tell within seconds whether it's AI generated or whether it's been done by a professional. And I couldn't agree more. It's something you should absolutely be investing in. And it's not to say that you won't have to invest again in the future, because brands do evolve and change. But what we don't want to be doing is launching a brand with poor branding and then having to update it in a very short space of time. So do it right first time round.
And so much goes into branding as well. Often people think that branding is a logo, a color, and a particular font. And they go, yep, I've got my branding done. That could not be further from the truth, right? And when you invest in branding and you see a full branding kit that is done professionally, you realize how much goes into it. It's the copy, it's the tone of voice, it's different kinds of fonts, it's sort of vision boards and aesthetics, poses. There's so much that goes into it. And AI simply just can't tap into your brain and deliver that.
No, it's about storytelling for me. You
Mm.
know, it's you need to work with someone who firstly I think understands the fitness consumer. That's really important because there's lots of designers out there and it's not essential that they understand the consumer, but I do think it really adds value. But they need to be able to extract your story and tell that story through that whole visual pack.
And I've always said if I didn't go into the fitness industry, I would have loved to have been a psychologist, because I am fascinated about the way that the human mind works and behaviors and subconscious thought patterns, and branding speaks directly to that. So there is so much science and psychology around how different fonts land, how different colors work, and what they trigger. So from a storytelling perspective, there is an entire element of this that if you don't know, you just don't know.
Absolutely. And Matt, no getting any ideas of jumping ship and deciding to become a psychologist at this
Look, we do
stage.
plenty of therapy when we deal with these clients and these team members, so I'm satisfied on that front.
Good, good. So let's talk about the next part of the puzzle. And it's something that, again, is a really common mistake we see, which is clients who have no financial gain ultimately. So it's a huge pitfall not having the financial planning in place. And it's something within the Start Your Studio Profitably program. It's a huge part of what we do. We work with our clients to deliver really robust 3-year financial forecasts and modeling. And it's not always everyone's favorite topic. Not everybody loves numbers as much as we do, Matt. And we get that. And we want to make it as digestible and understandable as possible. But ultimately, if you are opening your own business, you need to live and breathe your numbers.
And if you think that you're going to be able to open a business and be successful with it and never put a foot outside of your comfort zone, you need to change that mindset straight off the bat, because there are going to be plenty of things that you're going to have to face up to with it. And procrastination, particularly around this sort of thing, is absolutely not an option.
Yeah. And this is when you're looking at your financial modeling, you're looking at your 3-year projections. So your sales, your revenue growth, you're looking at your operating expenses, you're looking at your payroll, and all of these things should be scaling in line with the growth of your studio. So we don't need to be most studios don't start with a full timetable, or at least they shouldn't. They should be starting with a timetable that reflects the number of members that you're going to be opening with and scaling that in line with your payroll, with your operating expenses. And they also need to be considering those startup costs as well. And a common mistake we often see is one, just using random estimations rather than actually going out and doing the hard work and getting quotations. And there's a place where all these numbers are estimations, but we need them to be as accurate as possible. And make sure you're building a contingency as well. So 10 to 20% buffer, because unfortunately things often cost more than you think they're going to. We often have hidden costs, or perhaps even sometimes you're taking on a space where you think something is in order, and you get in, you dig beneath the surface, and you realize there's something that needs a lot more work than you initially thought.
Yeah, and there's some really important ratios that you have to make sure you're hitting when you're mapping these sorts of things out, particularly if you're going for funding. A lender is going to be looking at these key benchmarks as a sign that you have a feasible business. It's also really important that you can't have all of the numbers be dependent on hitting one particular thing. So, for example, you can't say, I've got every class has to be at 90% capacity, and as long as I can do that, then all of the numbers will work. Well, because that's putting everything on a knife's edge. So, you've got to think of it like a big puzzle piece, and all of the pieces have to work together.
Yeah. And the big thing we're seeing is if you're going out for funding, or if you just want to have a sustainable business, you need to be looking at around a 30% profit margin is our goal. And the stats out there right now are terrifying. Less than 1 in 10 boutique studios are sustainably profitable. And that stat still shocks me to this day. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that's really key. And that starts with good financial planning. So you want to be gearing towards that 30% profit margin. And there's also a couple of other key metrics. Matt, do you want to share some of the other metrics we look at when it comes to OPEX and payroll?
Absolutely. And it's pretty simple to remember: 30, 30, 30, 10. Okay. 30, 30, 30, 10. Essentially, we want 30% going to our operating expenses. That's things like rent, utilities, our CRM fees, our loan repayments, all that sort of stuff. 30% going to our practitioner labors. So this is what we're actually paying our instructors to execute on our schedule. Ideally, like you said, Alina, a 30% profit margin. And then you've got 10% left over there to kind of play around with. And typically what we'll see when we're launching a new studio is that 10% will go towards the OPEX, maybe split a little bit with the labor costs as well, as we're starting to build up our membership base.
Absolutely. One of the other areas we see is make or break from your business is the 3 L's: location, landlord, lease. You can't outsell a bad location, a bad landlord, or a bad lease.
Yeah, and this is such a brutal one, Alina. Like, I have seen entrepreneurs who are so talented, so passionate, and they have all the promise in the world. And then this one thing it can kill a business before it even gets off the ground. And sometimes there's no amount of skill when it comes to sales or creative entrepreneurship that can overcome these sorts of things. So it's absolutely pivotal that we get this one right.
100%. And we obviously see a lot of leases. We negotiate a lot of leases with our clients to help them go back to the landlords to make sure they get a really fair lease that's going to allow them to be successful. So when you're looking at your leases, think about negotiating build out timelines. Think about rent-free periods, that rent abatement piece. Think about landlord improvements, so the TI side of things. Also think about the smaller clauses in there. So whether it be things around like HVAC, we've seen so many people be caught up with HVAC. Make sure that it states at least that it has to be in good repair, and there's at least a 90-day warranty on those things. We had one client that didn't have that in there, had signed the lease before they worked with us, and it ended up costing them $100,000 to fix this problem, which is huge. So it's so important you really go through those clauses with a fine-tooth comb and get legal help. Don't rely on just ChatGPT or just reading through it. This is such an important part where you really do need to invest. And as part of the Start Your Studio Profitably program, you do get lease review and lease support from our legal team. So we will support you. But even with that, we always suggest you have local legal representation because things can change from state to state, country to country. So I can't underestimate how important it is to get the right lease.
I'll throw in a couple of extra ones that I'm always hawk-eyed for when I'm looking at these leases. The first is the personal guarantee and the duration of that. If you can get that at 3 years, then that is really an ideal benchmark. But we often see these leases coming through from landlords looking for 10-year personal guarantees. And I mean, your business will be successful if we do all the right things for sure, but that is still a lot of sleepless nights if you're locked in for 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would try and avoid a personal guarantee
Altogether.
as if you
if
can.
you can, for sure. That should be your starting point for the negotiation. But I think that the other piece too that I really look out for is non-competes, particularly if you're in a retail space like a strip mall or something like that, trying to put a clause in there so that a competitor can't open up 2 doors down and just try to eat into your market.
And on this note, while we're talking about leases, this ties in with landlords. You are going to be in business with this landlord for at least in the US, probably 5 years. In the UK, we're looking at 10, 15-year leases. So you need to make sure that this is the right partner. And it's so important that you dive into that early on. Most landlords that I've met or I've encountered through my businesses, unfortunately, have been of a certain character, shall we say, and that causes problems. Don't get me wrong, we've put measures in place to mitigate that. But ultimately, having a landlord that truly wants you to be successful is really important. So don't underestimate how important it is that you interview them as much as they interview you. And when it comes to finding property and property acquisition, it's super important to really showcase why they should choose you, because it's a really competitive landscape. And if they've got a really well-known brand versus a startup, it makes sense for them to sway towards the well-known brand because they have a track record, they have accounts that they can show, whereas all you've got to show is ultimately a piece of paper saying, this is what I think I can do. So in that case, you have to sell that story, which comes back to the branding that we talked about earlier. You need to sell to them why they need you in that space. So if you're in that strip mall, if you're in a key area, what are you going to bring to that area for them? How are you going to benefit their other businesses? How are you going to benefit that space?
Yep. And I will say that the negotiation of the lease and the terms and that relationship with the landlord is an ongoing, living, breathing thing that will exist for the duration of the lifespan of your business. So even if you've signed a lease a couple years down the track, there's absolutely no reason why you can't open up a conversation to look to continue to negotiate on some of these terms as things evolve. So don't be shy of that. But Alina, you just touched on the one that I am the most excited to talk about and the most passionate about, which is selling and the reluctance thereof when it comes to this sort of thing.
Yeah, and it's something that both Matt and I see as probably the number one thing that stops people being successful. And we often see that at the start of the journey, the studio owners will tell us that they're willing to do anything and everything to make their studio a success, that they're happy to and ready to embrace the sales process, but often the reality can be quite different. And it's really important, I think, to be honest with yourself. First of all, you do need to have the right mindset when it comes to selling, because it will make or break that sales process. You also need to make sure that you are truly committed to that process. And we'll come on to in a second to talk about the time you have to allocate to this, which I think always surprises people. But also here, it's if you truly can't do it or won't do it, you have to plan for that. And we need to plan for that right at the start. So when we're doing that financial modeling, if you can't commit the time or you aren't willing to do the responsibilities of it, we need to find someone and hire someone to do that for you, because this will make or break your business. And, we are seeing studios having incredible results in pre-sale. One of my clubs recently sold 100 memberships in just 1 hour in pre-sale. So the possibilities are huge, but we had a whole team on the phone that day making that a reality. That wasn't just coincidence, it was intentional.
Yeah. So when it comes to the selling piece, like you kind of said, it's so important to just be honest with yourself around your reluctance with this, your skill set around this, and where you realistically think you're going to land with it. Because it is an okay option to delegate that responsibility, but then we have to make sure we're accommodating for that because the sales process is a non negotiable in all of this. It genuinely is. And so we at the end of the day don't mind who's doing it. We want someone who thrives in it and is comfortable with it and successful with it. And if that's not you, that's okay. But who is that person? That is absolutely a question that has to be answered.
And the one thing we hear a lot is, oh, I hate selling. I just don't want to sell. And I would challenge you to reframe your mindset here.
Hmm.
It's not about sleazy selling tactics. It's not about, that kind of old school hard sell. It's about providing a solution. Everybody in the fitness industry, you would hope, got into it because they have a passion for helping people. They have a passion for helping people live a healthier, happier life. And that's what you've got to focus on. You've got to focus on the solution you're providing. And when it comes to selling, we spend a huge amount of time with our clients coaching them, helping them develop sales manuals, develop scripts. And by scripts, I don't mean literally reading word for word verbatim. What I mean is giving you a framework to follow so you know what to say, when to say it, and also how to overcome some of those obstacles you get in those conversations. And the more you do it, it's like with anything, the more comfortable you feel with it. But when you position it from a stance of providing a solution to help someone rather than trying to sell them something, it's amazing how that shift can really make a big difference.
Yeah, we tie our hands behind our own back psychologically with so much of this. We're not doing cold calling with any of this. These are leads that we're following up with who have proactively reached out to us because they've engaged in some way,
Mm.
shape, or form with our brand. They've liked it and they want to know more. So we're actually doing a service. And I always thought to myself when I was deep in my sales roles that at the end of the day, when you ask people what the most important things to them in life are, what you'll hear is that it's family and it's health.
Mm.
They are always the top two things that people say are the most important things in life. And we are directly speaking to that health portion. We are improving people's quality of life when it comes to all of that. And even a little bit more anecdotally, providing family. We
Yeah.
provide communities and connection and stuff within our studios. So it's a win win.
It absolutely is. And I think it's important that we share some of the numbers we see so that you have a realistic expectation of what you're going to need to do here. So, first things first, your wait list size during your pre-sale is going to depend on the number of clients you need. But usually we're seeing wait lists in excess of 600, 700,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes over
Over
1,000.
1,000. Yep.
And we're often targeting at least 100 to 250, 300 pre-sale members, again, depending on the size of your space. And those numbers all come from your financial modeling. So you're going to need to be hitting some fairly big numbers. We integrate a lot of automations into the process. So we take out some of the manual legwork. And those automations often drive 20, 30, maybe 40 members without any work. They're those people that are the early adopters. They're that type of buyer type who want to get that deal and they want to be the first to get it. But we've got to consider the other buyer types who perhaps need a little bit more coercion
Mm-hmm.
and persuasion to take action. They need to hear from other people of the experience they've had. They perhaps need to speak to someone. And that's where your role as a salesperson comes in. During that pre-sale phase, we recommend to clients that they spend generally on average 3 to 4 hours a day making phone calls. And again, to clarify, you have a lead. They often need around 12 points of contact before they'll make a purchase. So the automations will take a couple of those, but most of them are actually picking up the phone, speaking to them, meeting them face to face, having those conversations. So if you ring someone and they don't pick up and you leave a voicemail, yes, that counts as one point of contact, but it doesn't stop there. You need to call them again and again and again. And I don't mean all in one row in the space of 5 minutes, albeit I do like the second call immediately after a technique. But you need to make sure you're using your CRM effectively to schedule follow-up calls so no lead slips through. And these follow-up calls, you may have to call someone 8, 9, 10 times. So that's where that time comes in. And often we hear from studio owners, I called them once. Well, that was nice.
Yeah, they didn't pick up, so I tried.
So I think what we're trying to say here is this piece is so important. And getting it right will really make a difference. We are opening studios profitably, which a lot of people don't think is possible. We all hear that, oh, no startup's going to be profitable within the first 2 years. It's nonsense. We're seeing it every single day. But often selling is the biggest thing and biggest part of it.
Yeah, and my final thought on this, because you and I could talk about this for
We could.
hours, Alina, is just that the timepiece is not just how many minutes you're on the phone to someone. It's about doing adequate preparation ahead of that call to ensure that you're getting the ROI for the short period of time that we're often granted on those calls. There are 5 different buyer types, and they all respond to different communications, different processes, and just a different approach to the selling. So, if you can identify what that is and tailor your approach, it's going to make you more efficient in the long run. So, just one to be mindful of.
Absolutely. So I'm conscious that we could talk on this all day, as you just said, Matt. So let's move on to the next one, which is procrastination. This is something which always surprises me to a degree, but it's something we see a lot of. So talk to me about the experiences and what you see, Matt.
Yeah. So the entrepreneurial flair is such a motivator and it's such an exciting thing. But what I've found in my experience working with hundreds of clients is that it really seems to target the areas that we're either super passionate about or super comfortable with. And anything that doesn't fall into either of those categories is often the one that starts to drop down the to-do list and starts to get deprioritized. But I would make the point that they're probably the areas we need to focus on the most, right? Because they would likely become the gaps in our business or the cracks that things could start to fall through. And we just can't afford to be doing that.
Absolutely. And you touched on it so beautifully there. Founders procrastinate often the things that they feel insecure about, that they don't feel comfortable with. And being an entrepreneur, being a business owner, you have to step out of your comfort zone. You have to take educated risks. You have to be brave. You have to learn. You have to grow. And it's those things that will make or break. So it can cause delayed hiring, delayed launches, delayed sales. There's so many pitfalls to not taking action. So my challenge to you is, if there's an area that you just really don't enjoy, you're insecure about, you perhaps feel you don't have the skills or the confidence to do it, target that first on your to-do list that day. That is the first item. Make the hardest item the first one you do, because it will mean that the more you do it, the less scary it will become. And if you need help, if you need to learn about it, go and learn about it. If numbers for you is just your worst thing ever, there's so many courses out there online. There's so many people out there that can support and help you learn the basics. And I'm not saying you need to become an accountant and have a degree in finance. What I'm saying is you need to understand the key things that will drive the success within your business.
Yeah, they call it swallowing the frog.
Oh,
Have
I've
you
not heard
have
of
you
that
heard of
one.
that
No, is that an
concept?
Australian thing, Matt?
And maybe it's an Australian thing, and don't ask me to tell you why they call it that, but that concept of tackling the thing that is the most difficult for you or that's causing you the most anxiety and doing it first is a concept called swallowing the frog.
Well, that's new to me. So again, I'm going to add an additional challenge in then, is try and get that in a sentence this week.
Exactly. No, I totally agree with all of this, Alina. And look, I think that, and maybe this is the alternate universe that where I'm a psychologist in that universe starting to permeate into this one. But for me, if you're not spending as much time self-reflecting on yourself as a business owner as you are on the business yourself, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Particularly when going through this process, it can feel like a little bit of a silo. And that's something we hear so commonly amongst our clients that we work with, is that they're so happy to just not feel alone, that they've got Studio Grow beside them. But it's really important that you do self-reflection and really honest self-reflection so that you can
Yeah.
identify those areas that you're weaker at, and then you can take proactive steps to educate yourself and, you know, really stay close to how you're feeling about these sorts of things. Because if you can swallow the frog a little bit easier because you know that that's something that you're going to have to do and you can prepare for it, it's just going to help.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to talk about today, Matt, is cutting costs in the wrong places. So this is a major pitfall and something we see can often happen. Founders think they're being smart by perhaps cutting costs on certain things, but they often cut costs on things in the wrong places.
Yeah, and this is one of the ones that I called out at the start of this episode, which was branding is absolutely not an area to cut costs on. If you do that, then things can just plummet. I think as well, investing in sales, like we've spoken about, if you're not the best person to do that, or you're going for a volume that requires more than one person to work on it, you absolutely can't skimp on the labor to be able to cover that.
And marketing's another one for me as well. This
Mm.
is often, and we see this in huge businesses. And my husband works in marketing, and we've seen this over the years that often when a business is perhaps going through some hardships or the sales aren't where they need to be, they cut marketing, which is completely and utterly counterintuitive because you need to grow your business, you need to sell your way out of it. Obviously, there's options to reduce costs, etc., as well, but reducing costs in the right places again.
And often when I'm doing financial projections with clients and we get to filling out the marketing line and I put in there about 10% of revenue, which is roughly the benchmark that you want to be on for growing a business, and clients see that number, they gasp because it is such a significant number. But I always say to them throughout this process, I am protecting this marketing spend like it is a lifeline because it is a lifeline. If we cut on that, then we're not going to have any of that coming in. We can't sell. We don't have the members. We don't have the revenue. The whole thing crumbles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last thing on this note as well is if you are going to cut costs and you do need to reduce the total spend on your business when you're starting up, is look at how you can value engineer things. So whether it be design, equipment choices, finishes, doing some things DIY versus outsourcing, there are plenty of opportunities. But again, it comes down to the right things here.
So let's just go through a really quick recap now of the things that we kind of discussed. We started off talking about branding and the importance of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The second thing we talked about was really knowing your numbers and getting deep into under the skin of those and living and breathing them every day.
The three L's: location, lease, landlord.
Next up, learning to sell or partnering with someone who can if you really can't do it.
Yep. And then getting comfortable with being uncomfortable so that we can avoid any sort of procrastination.
And cut the right costs. Really think smart about where you can save.
Yeah, because remember, at the end of the day, Alina, opening profitably or being profitable is not luck.
No.
It's all within your control.
And you need to be intentional. You need to commit. You need to be realistic. And it's something you said to earlier, Matt, really resonated with me, which is about reflection. Have time to really reflect on what it is you're willing to do, what it is you want. And that comes down to the lifestyle that you want to live, how you're going to balance your business and your personal life, which is a really important thing, especially since a lot of the people we work with have young families. But put time in your diary every day to reflect, to think about what you need, where you're at, where your strengths are, and don't stop doing that. Keep doing that throughout this whole journey.
Absolutely. So we hope that you're walking away from this episode with some really good tips and tricks, some really key focus areas on what are the pillars that are required here to open profitably. Hopefully, no existential crises as you start to self reflect as deeply as we're encouraging you to. But that has been our episode on how to open profitably. Alina, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise, Matt.
Everyone, please make sure that you like, subscribe, share this podcast with someone who's maybe going through the process of opening a studio. And we cannot wait to see you next time on The Business of Boutique Fitness.